Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Kingston Writers Fest. My name is Sarah Tiang, and as a member of the Kingston Writers Fest Festival Committee, I'm very pleased to introduce event number 12, Wild Rides. And it's going to be a wild ride, right, Ian and Maria? It's going to be super wild. Please note, our land acknowledgement is also on the screen in the foyer. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how we try to honor the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee peoples who lived here before us and still call it home, and that we are so grateful for the opportunity to share this space that is so rich in history, language, and storytelling. In a moment, I will introduce our authors, but first, a few words about the event itself. It will last for approximately an hour and a half, which includes a Q&A at the end, so make sure you have all your questions ready. You'll be able to come to the mic, which is going to be front and center, to ask your questions. If you have any mobility concerns, you can just raise your hand and an usher will come to you with a mic. I'd like to draw your attention as well to the PEN Canada empty chair. As we gather to celebrate our freedom to write and to read, this vacant chair symbolizes the absence of a writer whose defense of these freedoms has led to their persecution and imprisonment. You'll find more information on the PEN Canada website. Please do check it out. Freedom of speech is at an all-time low. Kingston Writers Fest would also like to thank the sponsor of this wonderful event, Burgundy Dunn of Viridius Lex LLP, Jan Walter and Steve Isco, author patrons of Maria Reva, and Trish Krause and Nancy Evans, author patrons of Ian Williams. We are also grateful to the City of Kingston Arts Fund, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Canada Council for the Arts, as well as the many institutions, businesses, and individuals who support the festival, and all of our incredibly dedicated volunteers who work long hours for the love of books. So to all of them, thank you. Okay, for the usual housekeeping details, please mute any devices that might ring or beep. In every single session I've hosted so far, there's been at least one, so even if you think you have it off, check please. You can also refrain from taking pictures or recording the event. We do have a festival photographer whose photographs will be posted on our website daily. Okay, now it is my pleasure to introduce our absolutely fabulous authors. Ian Williams is famous for his highly original, often offbeat style, which is not only popular, but award-winning, like heavily award-winning. His poetry collection, Personals, was shortlisted for the Griffin Poetry Prize. His short story collection, Not Anyone's Anything, won the Danuta Glebe Literary Award for short fiction, and his debut novel, Reproduction, won the Giller Prize. He puts one out, it will get a prize. Of Reproductions, Williams said, "It should read like a good love story. That's the only thing I want to read and write or care about in people's lives." The same applies to his latest novel, You've Changed, the story of a love triangle twisted by unseen pressures in unexpected ways. Maria Reva's first book, an anthology of short stories titled Good Citizens Need Not Fear, dissects the turbulent 70s and 80s in Ukraine with her trademark dark humor through a cast of unforgettable characters that weave the stories together. Now in her daring and improbable debut novel, Endling, also set in the Ukraine, she somehow deftly blends snail sex, sham brides, and the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, blending horror and absurdism to craft a metafiction tale that explores the ethics of writing about war and conflict. Anne Patchett calls it funny and smart. This is essential reading. Please join me in welcoming Maria Reva and Ian Williams.
Hello, everybody. You can hear me? You can hear Ian?
Here. Hi, everyone. Hi, Kingston again.
Excellent. Well, good news and bad news. Good news, I finished off the festival wine right before coming here. Bad news, this is a recorded event, so I have to be quite polished. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. And it's not too often you see just like two authors in conversation, like without the intervention. And so who knows where it's going to go exactly.
It's going to be a wild ride.
And then there'll be a part at the end for audience questions, so feel free. Where do you want to start?
Well, should we introduce our books and what they're about?
Yeah, okay. Is that me to do first? Or?
Yes, since I asked the question, you have to answer it.
So, You've Changed is a departure from reproduction. So when I wrote reproduction, it was this big multi-generation story, right? 3 generations forward, it kept expanding and expanding and expanding. And I wanted to do something that was very different. I wanted to write something on a very small and intimate scale, reduced cast, so not generations all through time, but just 2 people in a marriage. So they couldn't escape the novel. They were locked into the relationship and the novel. And it asked questions about how much pressure can a marriage withstand? And other questions about beauty. What does it mean to be aging and female and pursuing beauty? When does that cross over into something more pernicious and dangerous? On the husband's side, like how much of our identities are wrapped up in work? And when we lose our work, do we lose ourselves, right? And then putting these pressures together, if 2 people are diverging and growing in their own direction, can the marriage container still kind of keep them together? And I'm sure people in this room, you have your own experiences with marriage. This is a book about marriage by a man who's not married. Just like reproduction is a book about reproduction by a man who doesn't have kids. I feel like that space is the most fascinating for me, right? To live this parallel life, right? Like if there were ever a biography, maybe it would just be a biography of his imaginary life, right? So, yeah, how would you describe?
So when they say write what you know, you're like, nah, F that.
No pleasure in that.
Okay, so my book is also in a way about marriage, some of it. So it's about the marriage industry in Ukraine that used to exist. So first I'll backtrack. And what inspired this was a conversation my sister had with her airplane neighbor. So my sister is a renowned composer. She was doing Anna Corona. I gotta do the name plug. So she was on her way to Princeton at the time to pursue her PhD. And her airplane neighbor was an American fellow. And as soon as they got to talking, and she said she was born in Ukraine, this man said, well gosh, I would really love a Ukrainian girl as a wife because American women are so ambitious and aggressive. And she told me this story, and I would have really loved to have seen her face in that moment. Because my sister's not someone you would want to cross in an alley. She's she holds her own. So then I started wondering, what are people in North America saying about Eastern European women, Slavic women? So I actually went onto English language Google and I typed in Ukrainian women. And the results were really underwhelming. They were mostly about how to date Ukrainian women. And so that's how I learned about this marriage industry that used to exist before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine that would bring in men from all over the world into Ukraine, sold under this promise that they would find the perfect docile bride, untainted by feminism and modernity. And so basically folks who were very disenchanted with their local dating pools. And it's not so far-fetched because everyone I talk to about their local dating pools, everyone's pretty disenchanted. Everyone in Vancouver's Vancouver's the worst place to date people. You just have to go to somewhere else, right? So I wanted to focus on 13 of these grooms who go to Ukraine to find their perfect brides, and they have the unfortunate luck of being kidnapped by activists who are trying to bring this entire industry down.
So it started with the marriage plot, rather than with the sales or the science or with the...
Yeah, that's right. I was really writing about that specific industry, and I started the book in 2018. And then I was trying to understand the motivations behind everyone in these romance stories, right? And there are these, basically these highly packed itineraries that lead the men through different cities in Ukraine, and there's all these icebreakers and socials, etc., speed dating sessions. And so I was exploring the motivations of the men to come there, but I also wanted to see what are the women there doing, and do they actually want to get married? And I decided no, none of them do. And so there are the activists who are infiltrating the industry, and then there's also a biologist who is using proceeds from these tours to fund her mobile lab, which is trying to save snails from the brink of extinction. Yeah, so she's trying to get them to reproduce.
Yeah, I learned a lot about snails. Dog-eared there. Yeah, so I mean, folks like to know like what a book is about, and so you get a sense of plot, right? But even like hearing you describe it, like there's so much more that happens in a book apart from like it's more than about the marriage industry there. How does your book work?
How does it work?
Yeah, how does it work? If it were like a watch or something, how would you explain how it progresses then? How does it move through time?
Right. I imagine a train going along its rails, and it's like 4 years into its trajectory. It's like going full speed, and then the train completely derails and falls off the tracks.
That's weirdly apt.
Yeah, we'll get into the derailment, but that is what I imagine the novel to be. How does your novel work?
Yeah, so it's in 3 parts, and after each part, there's a major kind of like formal change that happens, right? So the story, the characters are changing, they're evolving, but then the book itself does this kind of pivot, right, at every third. So the second third, it starts censoring and editing itself, right? You'll see it starting to black things out. We talk more about that. And then in the third section, it starts to have a very active memory, right? Recalling like good old days, and like you'll see this faded text that the memory of things you've read just keep coming back. So yeah, it's also like the writing or the telling of the story kind of evolves as well. You do something radical. I kind of want to, maybe we should read a little bit.
Yeah, let's read a little bit before the trains start derailing.
Yeah, there's a major derailment in Maria's.
It's a wild ride.
Yeah.
I have to say this periodically in the event. Yes.
Do you want to read first?
Okay, I will read first. Yes.
You want to say something, or are you going to read?
Okay, I'm going to read, about these fellows who are about to get into the trailer. Okay. So as I mentioned, there's a bride, and she has a trailer full of snails. Well, it doesn't go well for her. The snails have basically all died, and so her conservation mission has not been doing well. So her trailer is essentially empty, and these activists, who are also taking part in the tours, they convince her to take part in this kidnapping scheme to kidnap a bunch of these Western bachelors as a big media stunt to show the world how awful these romance tours are. So this chapter is written from the perspective of one of the men who's about to get into the trailer. The romantic getaway was starting any minute, Bertrand told Pasha, a bonus social. They'd have 2 hours to puzzle their way out of a mobile escape room, and once they did, they'd be at their destination, a pagan fertility party in the woods. The invitation was extremely exclusive, according to the woman who'd invited Bertrand. The men had been specially vetted by the brides who'd be at this party. Was Pasha game? Bertrand asked. It was the last night of the romance tour. The theme was prom night, where the men wore suits and baby's breath boutonnieres, and the women swished around in long gowns. The night had begun primly, with bachelors and brides awkward as teenagers as they slow danced to soulful ballads, while Pasha hung back at the bar, pretending to peruse the leather-bound tome of cocktail offerings, pretending not to notice that the one bride he had hopes for, who had not answered his date request, was doing a cross-armed shot with a long-haul driver from New Orleans. The MC's toast to the newly engaged couples, which did not improve Pasha's mood. After that, the lights dimmed and the techno pounded. Sweaty bodies writhed around as Pasha as he sipped back one overly complicated and Western-priced cocktail after another. And then we're going to skip a little bit ahead. After his 4th cocktail, Pasha had at last admitted defeat. He pushed through the crowds toward the exit, determined to pack up that very night, fly back to Vancouver on standby. That's when Bertrand had come out of nowhere, 2 shots in hand, and pulled him into a quiet back room with purple fruits and floor-to-ceiling aquarium of jellyfish, backlit and radioactive yellow. At first, Pasha said he'd pass on this exclusive romantic getaway. I didn't get the invitation anyway. Bertrand tipped back his shots. Ah, come on. I'll pull some strings. Look at you, man. How did they not let you in? You're as eligible as they come. Engineer, full head of hair. And then we have progressed now through the scene where they're getting more and more inebriated, and Bertrand is trying to convince Pasha to get into this trailer. Until finally, Bertrand gave Pasha a somber look. Have you ever watched a pigeon get laid? Pasha shook his head. Well, you should, Bertrand said. There's a lesson in there. He's all puffed up, he's bobbing and dancing circles around her, he's vibrating with love, and she's whacking at a piece of bread. Doesn't seem to notice him. And you know what? She's right. Takes a lot of work to make an egg. A lot of protein to chalk up, you know? She's got to keep her gates on lockdown. That's her job. And it's the male's job to prove he's not just any male. He's not going away. He'll always be there. To take care of the chicks? Pasha said. No, you're overthinking it. You think pigeons look that far ahead? Neither should you. The pigeon just keeps dancing. Dodging cars, people. He just dances till his tiny feet are raw against the pavement. She might be gone by the time he's done. In fact, it's not about her anymore. But maybe she is still there. A switch flips, her gates open. The women here in Ukraine, they're like that. Natural, traditional. They might look more interested in a bread crust than they are in you, but it's an act. So what are you gonna do, huh, Pasha? Are you gonna fly away, or are you gonna keep dancing? So would you get into this mobile lab escape room after that speech? I think you would.
It's great camaraderie between. This is a great image in the book, right? Of just the men are in the trailer of this truck, and it's like a snail traveling across the landscape, right? This obsession with snails, and then the men are in the shell of this snail. Question to Paul's on. We talk about writing characters of the other gender. Like you write men well, right?
I hope so. I mean, they're not all like this. Not all men, you know. But,
Is that kind of like bro talk between you two guys? You've been privy to this?
I'm so sad that this is a recorded event. I have some friends who I will not name in certain parts of the world, in certain professions, who have a way of speaking to each other. Yes.
Yeah. It's authentic.
Thank you.
It's authentic. Okay, I will read from the first part of You've Changed. So Beckett has recently, Beckett's works in construction. He's recently been fired from his job. That's going to set off a crisis in him. His wife, Princess, is a fitness instructor. So this is like a few days after being laid off. Day 7. Princess insisted he come to the gym with her. Inside, not just a drop-off. He did one of her classes, and apparently he had muscle memory of the sense of physical failure, which was one reason he had stopped attending. Later, he hammered his leg with her massage gun, one of his better gifts to her. Later still, he slouched in front of the TV and folded origami shapes with shiny paper, one of her better gifts to him. Upstairs, she laid out workout clothes for him for the next day's class, as if he needed help to dress himself. She seemed to assume his unemployment meant a gym buddy for her. He said, "I'm not going back to the gym." "But you're so cute," she said. "They should have hired you instead of that young girl from Toronto. I heard they're planning to give her a yoga class at the same time as my stretch and strengthen. Like what? She barely has 200 hours of training." "I can get her fired," Beckett said. "I have the magic touch. When we go tomorrow, I'll show you who she is." "I'm done with gyms," Beckett sighed. "I want to stay home and get fat." She scrunched up her face. They both knew it wasn't true. Since he lost his job, he still woke at 6:30, still wanted to leave the house and arrive someplace that needed him by 7:30, even if that meant roaming the aisles of Home Depot and bringing home a 6-pack of work gloves. If Home Depot sold food and clothes, he'd never shop anywhere else. "You're going back to running?" Princess asked. And as soon as she said it, he knew that was the answer. Her intuition allowed her to predict his responses with uncanny accuracy. They had not been married 20, 10, or even 5 years, but she sometimes knew him better than he knew himself, like autocomplete in a search bar. He hadn't run in a long time, 5 years, not since his dog Pointy had died. But maybe he could run again. He could go through the stretches and run through the dark neighborhood to disco. He liked the nightlife. He liked to boogie. Maybe it was time for a new dog. "Starting in the morning," he said. "Good for you," Princess said. That made Beckett testy. His energy was pent up. "You could run through the dog park," she said, again predicting what he'd do. Beckett still frequented the dog park because some of Pointy's ashes were there. But to maintain his independence, Beckett said, "No, I was going to run around the golf course." "Oh yeah? Yeah. Fine, do it." "I will." "Well, good. Good. Go ahead. Starting tomorrow." She laughed. Even his testiness she found cute. To remind her of her mocking laughter, that night when she reached for him, Beckett crane lifted her hand from his body and told her that he had to run in the morning, so he needed his sleep. Thank you very much. So petty. so petty. Oh.
Yeah, a lot of the scenes, the marriage scenes in your novel are so tense.
Yeah.
And there's like a scorecard that I saw, you know? So that scene, yeah, Beckett 1, Princess 0.
Right. And these things eventually accumulate, right? So the changes are so incremental in the story that you don't even realize that the marriage has shifted under your watch, right? Like, he's just saying he's going to run, and there was a little fight about that. He said maybe you should get a little bit more filler in the lip, and now she's tense about that. And then, like, it just keeps building and building and building, and suddenly, like, who is this person, right? Yeah.
So we talked about kind of writing outside of our knowledge. Okay? So I figured maybe we could talk about our research.
Ooh.
And I know that you took an entire course on how to build a house because Beckett is, he builds houses.
Right.
Talk about that?
Yeah, so how to, this is like the Stanislavski method or something of writing a book, right? Like you have to do the thing to write it. So I was like seized by this idea 2 years ago, right? I wanted to write about someone who was like a very ordinary person, a very sort of regular guy. So the guy who goes to Home Depot who doesn't have novels written about him. Someone who doesn't read the novels that you write about him. The guy who buys, gloves and filters and keeps track of when to sort of replace the batteries in the smoke detector. And I needed to get into that person's head. This started, before this, there was another novel where I needed to sew, right? Because someone was sewing their own bridal dress. And so to do that, I had to figure out, like, where does your mind go when you're stitching something, right? It's not just about the act of, like, knowing technique, but those patterns, you remember them from, like, the 80s? I'm thinking of my mother's patterns. They would come in the mail, you would sort of clip along the dotted side, the lines, and then, like, make a whole dress out of them. So, like, I was stitching for a while, trying to figure out how that worked. And so for Beckett, I was like, okay, so what does this contractor do on a daily basis? And you're hammering a nail, or you've got a nail gun, and you're trying to, like, not kill yourself, or, like, shoot at somebody when there's a kind of focus that's there, but you've done it enough that you can actually let the other parts of your life kind of bubble up. And so, yeah, I really just kind of wanted to see, like, how does time work when you're engaged in something that is dusty, that is dangerous, that has you in heights, that has you teetering, that has you working with a bunch of other people of various degrees of commitment to their job. So yeah, I took this course. There were two parts. There was like this theoretical part they did for 5 weeks in front of a laptop, and this guy would tell you about like electrical and what to connect to what and what not to connect what. And then we went into a warehouse, and in 6 weeks we built this house inside the warehouse, which was crazy. The amount of yelling at I have not experienced since like grade school, right? And then you realize like not all jobs are all people sending you polite emails, right? Like can you do this? Are you available then? Like, no, it's like, stand up, reading wall until, right? Like there's some real abuse.
It's a very efficient form of communication.
And some people need it, I think, right? Some people respond to that, and other people have every day going on like, she didn't need to be like that, like talking to us. She could just tell us what you wanted us to do. Yeah, and folks would slack off and stuff like that. So that's research for me. Your research, is it all snail websites if I look at your browsing history?
Well, I mean, yeah, browsing history probably has landed on some weird lists, watch lists. But so I was kind of burbling along with my plot, researching snails and the marriage industry, and I read a lot of self-published books about how to date Ukrainian women, and learned a lot about kind of my own species. Yeah, and
Written by men or written by women?
they're always written by men. Yeah. And they're kind of like, I'll give you the secret, to unlock the Slavic woman, and the secret to your happiness. And so I learned a lot, and so I was moving along. I was 4 years into the book. The train was, on its tracks.
Yeah.
And then Russia invaded Ukraine. And my relatives back in Ukraine were calling from across the country saying that they were fleeing their homes, they were hearing explosions, and then all of them had to leave their homes except for one of them, my grandfather. And so I was born in Ukraine, and I grew up in Canada and visited many times. So
and at that moment, I gave up on this novel. I thought,
and at that moment,
I
gave up on this novel. I thought,
how can I keep writing this book?
How can I keep writing about real time? How can I keep writing this book when it's setting the
romance tours
real time?
It's done.
And
snails, I mean,
this
they're
premise
being
of
endangered.
romance
in my
tours,
mind,
like it's done.
So I gave up on it. I wrote a totally different novel.
So I gave up on it. I wrote a totally different novel.
But I kept obsessing over
I kept obsessing over these questions of what is my role as a storyteller in fiction certain times
to respond to
what's the role of fiction,
reality,
to respond to our
especially when we're watching something from abroad, so we're trying to live our
especially when we're
lives
trying
here
to
when
watch
watching
something
something
from
from
abroad,
abroad.
so we're trying
So you're getting your
to
information
live our
from like
mundane
CNN,
lives
from
here.
the news?
Wow.
So there
You're getting your information from like CNN, from the
there were
news?
multiple sources.
So there
was one source called
There were
Live
multiple
Maps,
sources.
and
I guess there was one source called Live Maps,
facet of modern
I guess
warfare
this
is that you have all these different lenses into
facet of
the
modern
war.
warfare.
So
So you
Live Maps
have
will look
all
at
these different
lenses
lenses into the war now. So
day by day.
on Live Maps, you can look at
and
a map of
very
day by day
located
these
footage
and
about
very
different parts of the country.
geolocated pieces of footage from civilians about different parts of the country. So,
crunched on top of
somebody
car, right? So all of
tank
these
and it's
things.
crunched on top of a civilian
so
car, right? So all of these
I watched
things.
a lot
So,
of pretty graphic imagery, and then
I watched a lot of
go to
pretty graphic imagery, and then I decided to go to
there.
a research trip.
And at that point, and I still couldn't really write fiction at that point.
And at that point, and I
so I was doing
really
research,
write
but it was
fiction
kind
at
of for
that
this
point.
amorphous
And
I wasn't really sure what.
so I was doing research, but it was kind of for this
but
amorphous.
Everybody's telling you you can't go
And
back.
of course,
There's
it's
a war
relatives
on.
as well,
You
but
can't go back. Everybody's telling you you can't go back. There's a war on. You can't go back. Go back.
Yeah.
Sort of tipped you over. Let me
I mean, I
think that
didn't
you
know.
could.
I didn't know
Go back,
that anything could
do
be
this, or-
safe.
I mean, I didn't know.
Just,
I didn't know.
My sister and I just
that
decided
anything
we
would
would
be
start
safe, but we would just
so
my sister and I just decided we would
the
start
western
at the kind of so-called
and then
safest
just
part
kind of
of
see
the
where
Ukraine,
it
so the
comes
westernmost
and
then just kind of
something I
see where
noticed, and it's kind of
were.
disturbing looking back.
And,
there were a sense of
Something I noticed is it's kind of disturbing looking back. Like, the first time we heard of air raid sirens, immediately this normalized. Like the first time we heard of air raid sirens, and because immediately this
nobody around
animal
is
panicking
to
hide,
heard
right?
those
But
sirens so many
because
times,
nobody
and we're
around
animals
is panicking,
because
the herd is
heard
not
those
panicking
sirens
so many
you
times,
find yourself
and we're
alone.
animals. So if the herd is not
Because, yeah, the
panicking,
sirens have become
you find yourself
normalized,
alone, then I
and
shouldn't panic, right?
So
Yeah,
then,
sirens have become
so it's like you
normalized in many
you
ways.
think, okay, well nothing's happened
so
to me
then-
so far, so maybe
it's
I
like
can
you-
push it a little more. I
You
can
think,
go
okay,
further.
well nothing's happened to me
right?
so far, so maybe I can push it a
So
little
anyway,
more. I can
to
go
get
a
back
little
to the question of
further.
research, right?
I found that,
so
yeah,
anyway,
to
to
get
get
back
back
to the question of
but I was
research,
writing
right?
these diary-like entries.
I found that, yeah, I first to deal with at that point
terror
of diary-like
entries.
and then
first to deal
while
with
in Ukraine,
terror
recording what I saw and kind of as a
And
way
then
to treat
while
reality
in
as material,
recording
almost like
what
a
I saw
psychological
kind of as a way
to
to treat
like if I could write about it, I could
material,
kind of have some
like
control over it and I could keep my distance from
Like
it.
if I could write about it, I
true, but
kind of have
we tell ourselves
control over it
stories as we're telling stories, right?
Really
So
we tell ourselves stories.
So yeah, in the end I knew I had to be there to write about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, in the end I knew I
You
had
find
to
yourself
be
becoming more
there
courageous
to
as you're
write
there?
about it.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
is there a numbness that's
become more courageous as you're
Yeah, I guess it's
Or
kind of a numbness.
is there a
It's a
numbness
self.
that's
Yeah, I guess it's kind of. I found kind of it's a self, almost like a self delusion. Like yeah, again, if nothing's happened to me so far, I'm safe. I can
almost
keep
like a
going.
self-delusion. Like,
And well, look at those. You know, look at that city. People are trying to live their normal lives. So maybe I
look
can
at
go
those.
there.
You know, look at that city. People are trying to live.
Yeah, I mean, like, how far do you go for a
There.
novel, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
I'm working with power
Like,
tools, I
how
still
far
have
do
my
you go
fingers,
for a
my
novel,
toes, my
right?
limbs,
Like,
right? I'm okay.
I'm working with
You're going into like a war territory for a novel that you thought that
You're going into like
died,
a war
right?
territory
You're trying to figure
for a
out
novel
a
that
way
you thought
into
that
it.
maybe died, right? And you're trying to
Yeah, it's
figure
bizarre to
out-
me, right? The lengths that we go, and sometimes you can't quite.
Yeah, it's bizarre to me.
There's no
Like,
physical
like,
act.
sometimes
you
you
can't
can't
see the
quite-
extent that novelists or writers go
There's no
to.
physical
The kind of like
act
internal
to see the
psychological
extent
plumbing,
that
like
novelists or
there's
writers go to.
material there.
But the kind of like
you don't want
internal
to deal or
psychological
access,
plumbing,
you
like
must do it
there
if you want to
material
write
there
fiction
that you don't want to deal or
Yeah,
access.
we did hit a
You must do
limit.
it if
So
you want to write
we
fiction properly.
went as far as
Yeah, we
Kharkiv,
did hit a
which is,
limit.
so very close to the Russian border.
went
and
as far
there's
as
very
Kharkiv,
little
which is,
time for
very close
warning
to the Russian
missiles
border,
and
and
combat.
there's
So
very little
we
time
went there, but we could not go to where my
we
grandfather
went there, but
is.
we
So
could
he's
not
in
go
Kherson, and
where my
he's the
grandfather
only
is,
family
so
member
he's
who's
in
stayed.
Kherson,
And
he's
because
the
we
only
couldn't
family
go there,
member
that
stayed.
felt too unsafe. And that's when my fiction
Because we
started to
couldn't go
turn
there,
into
that
like this
felt too
fantasy of
unsafe.
rescuing him.
That's
So
when
that's
my
kind of the
fiction
derailment
started
of the
to
book
turn
is
into almost like this
how does our
fantasy
fiction
of
bleed
rescuing.
into our real life, and how does our fiction
So
bleed
this
into
is
our
like the
real
fascinating
life,
thing with
and
the
how
book.
does
You're
it-
reading along, you're all invested in the story. What's going to
This
happen?
is like
Right?
a
There's a bit of a
fascinating
heist going on.
You're reading along,
and then
you're all invested in the story. What's going to
Just-
happen, right? There's a bit of a
I
heist
just give it
going on.
away, right? To say this,
And then-
right? Halfway through, no, I want you. You should do it.
Well, yeah,
Halfway
when I give up on the book,
Well,
and
yeah,
invasion's happening,
when,
like you see that
when I give up on
and
the
the book turns into a
yeah,
completely
invasion's
different
happening,
form and
like you
structure.
see
So
that
broadly
in the
speaking, it
book,
starts
and
as
the book
fiction and it
turns
ends
into a
as
different form
nonfiction.
and structure. So
And yeah, my
broadly speaking, it starts
grandfather's
as fiction and it
character in
ends
it,
as nonfiction.
I'm a character in it.
Yeah,
so
so
you-
grandfather's.
I kind of draw back the curtain
Um,
and how
I'm a
does
character
the
in
author
it,
keep
so-
writing this novel?
I kind of draw
The
back
ethics
the curtain.
behind it.
How
too.
does the author?
And
keep
bizarrely,
writing
everybody.
this novel?
So my trouble with
The
metafiction is sometimes
And bizarrely,
you lose your
so
investment
my
in it,
trouble
right?
with
You think like, oh, this is
metafiction
not
is
real, this
sometimes
seems so low. But like
you
all
lose your
throughout
investment
your
in it,
book,
right? You think like, oh, this is
everybody
not
seems real. Everybody
But like
seems
all throughout your
the
book,
fictional characters seem to operate
everybody
on a
seems
plane
to
of
be-
reality. It's not
everybody
like
seems-
you
fictional
become
characters
fiction,
seem to
but
operate
rather
on
like they
reality.
become
It's not like
real, right? They
you become
something like
fiction,
step out of
but
the
rather
book
like
into this real world that we're living in.
something
Rather
like
than the
that.
opposite. I mean, that would have
Into
been
this
a
real
failed
world
attempt,
that we're
right?
living
If
in.
everything
Rather than
flattened
that. I mean,
at
that
the
would have
appearance
been
of the
a
war.
failed attempt.
But no, instead everything got dimension at the appearance of
At
the
the
war. When you
appearance
did
of the
that,
war.
the
But
sure.
no, instead everything got dimension. at the appearance of the war.
It was really the only way I could write it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you
It was
about
really the only way I
kind of
could
more experimental
Yeah.
facets of
I
the
wanted
book
to ask
as
you
well.
about
But nobody told you to cut the metafiction.
Oh, right, okay.
Last question.
Yes, yes. No, I cut the metafiction.
Oh, right, okay.
So before showing
Yes,
anybody
yes,
the book,
no,
I
I
got squeamish about
Yeah.
it.
So
before showing
Nah, this
anybody
is
the
too
book,
weird. So I cut it all out and I tried to write the book straight.
Nah,
And I realized, oh, weird,
and I cut it all out and I tried to.
and it doesn't actually work
And I
anymore. So
realized,
then I realized, oh, well, if it's an essential part of the book, then it has to here and
Right.
there. And
If it's an essential part of the book.
fortunately, yeah, my agent and my editors they were very supportive of it. Fortunately, yeah, my agent and my editor.
Experimental,
They're very supportive of it.
Yeah, so I have to be like excited about something formally in a book for me to sort of persist with
Yeah,
it.
so
Like
I
the story
have
has
to
to
be
be
excited about
interesting
something
to me.
formally in
I
a book
love the
for me to
characters
sort
and
of
all that.
persist with it.
But then the book
story
itself
be
has to
interesting
be
I love the characters.
surprising and interesting
But
and
the
kind of
book
have a
itself
life of
has
its
to
own.
be
I really think about it
surprising and
as like an
interesting and has to have a
organism
life of its own.
of its
I
own.
really think about it.
So the characters
as like
have
an
life, they
organism
resemble humans.
of its
But the
own.
book, what kind of
So
beast
the
is
characters
it?
have
Like,
life,
how
they
does it
resemble humans.
behave and
But the book,
sort
what kind of beast is it?
walk through
Like,
space?
how does it move,
Um,
behave, and sort of work?
And yeah,
walk through
reproduction is
space?
full of like all of these
Um,
kinds of, there's a cancer text and there's a
And yeah, reproduction is
multiplier,
full of like all of these
chapters
kinds
and
of
perspectives and
cancer
all that.
tests, there's a multiple-
And in this book, it's
chapters and perspectives and all of that.
yeah,
and
there's
this
sort of
book is,
memory and recursivity and like also censoring.
Yeah,
So there's all this stuff
memory
happening
and
for it at the time.
recursivity and,
I was
like,
working on the Massey
also
lectures.
censoring. So there's all this stuff
at the same
happening
time
for
as
it at the
this.
time. I was working on
And
the
so I'm
Massey
thinking about
lectures,
censorship. I'm thinking about what
at the
we're
same
not
time
allowed to
as this.
say. And then the book
And
does
so
this
I'm
very
thinking about
literal
censorship,
thing
I'm
that's starting
thinking
to
about
like
what we're not
blacken
allowed to say.
words
And
that are
then the
not
book does this
acceptable
very
on
literal
TV,
thing that's
right?
starting to
Like
like
very
blacken
sort of literal kinds of
words
thing,
that
like
are
you
not
see.
acceptable on TV, right?
If
A
the
very sort
word
of literal kinds of thing, like you see.
like cock is there, but you mean like a chicken or something like that. That word has to go, regardless of the context.
You mean like a
It's
chicken
real
or something
draconian
like
and
that.
sexist.
That word has to go, regardless
That
of
happens.
context.
Well, what's great, so like
That
her
word
hand
is
is back
that's
there.
That happens.
Great at
What's
finding
so
balance. I can sort of go like a bit extreme with things and then
great at finding balance. I can sort of go like
right?
bit
You've done
extreme with
enough.
things.
Don't overdo
Say,
it. It's distracting at this point,
right?
right?
You've done enough.
And so to
Don't
find that
overdo it.
balance,
It's
you want
distracting at
to-
this point, right?
You don't want to be
And
too
so to
cute,
find
or
that
too
balance,
clever, or
you
too
wanted to-
anything like that. You've got to find that
You don't
right
want to be too cute,
right
or too
balance,
clever,
where
or
you
too
get it,
anything like
and
that.
the
You
technique
can't
is
find that
productive rather than
right
distracting.
balance where you get it,
Yeah.
and the technique is
Well,
productive
something
rather than distracting.
I get asked, and I wonder if you also get asked, is if you receive pushback from your editors and if you receive, and I find that actually having a trusting relationship with an editor is what helps further, because you can take more risks in having this kind of other set of eyes further, because you can take more risks balance having this kind of, right? So I actually think it's really wonderful. I went further than I would, right? So I actually think it's really wonderful. I went further than I would.
And if I just started like turning words on the page and all of that, I think Anne was for. I need a little bit of illustration and all of that. Right. I need a little bit of like.
I need a little bit of
That's
illustration.
enough. Settle down. All right. It's just
I need a little bit of
That's good, right?
That's enough.
But
Settle
what
down,
like
darling.
Anne and Sarah are very good at doing for me,
right?
is asking those questions a
Ed
bit.
and Sarah are very good at doing for me.
Why is he
Is
like
asking
this?
those
What
questions
happened in
a bit.
his childhood? Why does he feel like this?
Why is he like this?
Where's the
What
feeling?
happened in
And
his
yes, a
childhood?
lot of this can be
Why does he
suppressed,
feel
but
like
just a few gestures here and
Where's
there.
the feeling? And
Say,
yes, a lot of
tell me
this can be
about his mom.
suppressed, but
Tell
just
me
a
a
few
bit more
gestures
about
here
that
and there.
Thanksgiving. Like those
Say,
kinds of questions.
Mom, tell me a bit more about that
that
Thanksgiving. Like
will
those
sort of
kinds
like,
questions.
I don't know, like raise the
that
volume on the
will sort of
emotional
like-
life of the book.
I don't know,
Yeah,
like
that's
raise
what,
the
that's
volume
one of the things I
on the
appreciate.
emotional life of the book. Yeah, that's what,
Yeah.
that's one of the things I appreciate.
So we both work in multiple forms, right? So you write poetry, nonfiction, I write scripts for opera as well. And so I'm always thinking about the content versus the container.
Yeah.
Right? So when I'm working through my content, whatever the story is, and right? So and then I'm always thinking, is this the right container for this?
Right, use the word container
And
instead of form.
I'm always
like-
thinking, I use the word container.
Yeah.
Use the word container instead of
because
form, like-
I don't know container. First of all, I just love containers. I love them. Like Tupperware is my jam. So I'm always thinking, what is the perfect container for this? And I can take them for granted, right? Container for this. So when I'm in chapter by chapter, if I hit a chapter where it just doesn't want to be written as in chapter by chapter, if I hit a chapter, well, maybe this is actually meeting minutes. I go, maybe this is like that. Maybe it's dialogue.
Your
Yeah.
container.
Yeah, I change my container like that.
Yeah.
Do you think about your container?
I don't
Yeah,
use the word
change my
container, right? So I used to use the form content
Word
thing, right?
container,
Content
right?
versus
So
form. But now
I used to
the
use the
preferred
form
term for me is
content
like
thing.
content versus arrangement.
But
right?
now
an arrangement for me
the
signals
is
both like something
content versus
musical,
arrangement.
right? Like this is
An arrangement
a
for
way
me
to tell a
signals
story
both
that
like
probably has an
something
archetypal
musical,
history.
Right, like this is.
But also arrangement for me
Yeah.
feels like more sequenced and more
But also arrangement
like
for me feels
task oriented,
more
right?
sequenced
So how can I arrange this material?
like
So in a story that might be,
So how can I
it's a
arrange
marriage
this
here, but how can
material?
I arrange
So
the
in a
telling
story
of the
that
story
might be
in a way that is fresh
How can I arrange
and,
the telling of the story
full of life
in a way that is
lively
fresh
and all of that.
and full of life?
Yeah, and that's a real sort of like poetry kind of thing about juxtaposition and positioning and what two
that's
things.
a real sort of like poetry.
If I can put two things
juxtaposition,
together,
positioning, and what
what is the
things-
unsaid energy
if I
that
can
will
put
now be
two things
activated
together,
versus, you know,
what is the
me
unsaid
saying
energy
4 months
that
later
will now be
this or that
activated
happened, right?
versus
Just
me
put a
saying
memory
4 months later this or that
next to the thing that
Just
triggers the
put
memory.
a memory
And I don't have to explain the connection.
next to the
right?
thing that
Right, because
triggers
it's the text is a little bit more like a
Right,
faded
'cause
gray.
Right.
You can layer those
text
things
is a little
really
bit more
beautifully with the
faded gray.
fully black
Right,
text,
right.
right? There's different colors of
Right.
text in this.
Yeah, so we call it the memory text when we're working on it, right?
Yeah,
So
different
part
colors of
3,
text in
all of the
this.
memories
Yeah,
come
so we
back,
call it the
and
memory text
instead of
when we're
saying,
working on it, right? So
Beckett
part three,
recalled when he
all
was
the
a
memories
boy,
come back,
his friend
and
John.
instead of saying,
Beckett
we'll have
recalled
Beckett when he
say
was a
eating an
boy,
ice cream,
his friend John.
and then John
will
will
have
have
Beckett
chocolate.
say eating
Right?
ice cream.
And you know, because you've
And
been there
then
before, and you've
John
built this
will have
memory along with us.
Right.
And so
And
that
you know,
kind of
because
signal,
you've been there
you
before,
just
you've built
change
this
the font a
memory.
little bit and you know we're back in
And
time.
so that kind of
There's some
signal,
kind of
you
triggering
just
happening.
change the
there.
font a
Yeah.
little bit and you know we're back
Yeah,
in
it's
time.
efficient.
And there's some kind of triggering happening.
You-
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's-
No, I'm just thinking, I'm going to retreat into myself
Sorry,
for
go
a little bit, thinking about that.
I'm going to retreat into myself for a little bit. Thinking about
This doesn't
that.
work on camera, right?
I think so. In your book, there's a really beautiful moment where we start in
there's a really
third
beautiful
person
moment where
right? So it's back at this and back at this, etc. And then there's something that happens to him physically, etc. And then but it's like a visceral thing. And then suddenly he comes into his body, and we get into the first person perspective. So it becomes I,
Right.
and that gives it so much energy as well.
Yeah, there's this
I.
moment like, I think every text has
And
a
that
sort of
gives
crisis
so
or
much
breaking
energy
point,
as
right?
well.
Yeah, there's
You're writing
this moment,
along
like,
and
I
you
think
get to that
every
place
text
where
has
you're
a sort of crisis or breaking
done with
point,
it all,
right?
right?
You're writing along and you get to that place where you're done with it.
And yeah, it's a little bit through part 2, and then the book.
And yeah, it's a little bit through part 2.
Yeah,
and
picture
then
like
the book.
Celine Dion singing a power ballad, and she sung the same chorus a few
Yeah,
times,
picture like Celine Dion
and then the
singing a
key
power ballad,
changes, and suddenly it's a
sung the
whole
same
new
chorus a
song,
few
and it's
times,
natural, and the world
and then the key
like
changes,
opens up, and that's what it
suddenly
feels
it's a
like,
whole
right?
new
This key
song,
changes
and
shift of
natural,
perspective from third
like opens up,
to
and that's what
first,
it
and
feels
then
like.
something
Like,
else
the
in
key
part
changes
3.
shift of perspective from third
And to do it just
first, and then something
like
else.
not
in
make a
part
big
three.
deal over it, right? Just
And
do
to
it,
just,
and then suddenly it's a new book,
Like,
right?
not make a
Suddenly,
big deal over it,
we're
right?
looking at
Just do it,
a
and
different
then suddenly it's a
window.
new book, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly-
Yeah, I see you doing similar kinds of things, though, right? Like you're just picking the moments of crisis.
Yeah, I see you doing
And
similar
instead of
kinds of
retreating
things,
from those
right?
moments
Like
of
you're
crisis,
just
you're
taking
sort
the
of
moments
pushing
of
your finger
crisis,
down and
and
saying,
instead of retreating
I've got to
from those
break the
moments of
text
crisis,
here,
you're sort of pushing your
and let's see
finger
what
down and
happens,
say,
right?
I've
I feel
got
like
to
that's
break
the
the
best
text
of
here.
that fiction.
and let's
Yeah, I mean, in real life, I definitely
feel
retreated
like
from
that's-
the point of yeah, I mean, in real life, I definitely retreated from but because those things kept obsessing me, I do that. But because those things kept obsessing me, I just write about it. I knew that I had to.
Can I switch to something totally different? So he put all of his work into a novel. You have all of this
So
book
we
for
put
it.
all
We
this
lived for a
work
long
into
time,
a
for
novel.
years, just you and the novel.
You have all
Maybe
this
some
book
trusted
we lived
readers.
for a long time, for years, just you and the novel.
And then, I
Maybe
don't know,
some
the
trusted
Booker people
readers.
call you and say,
Um,
hey,
And then
we love this, you're on the long list.
Hey,
How does that feel?
It felt really strange. Very nice, of course. I was very grateful and honored. With this book, because it was so difficult to write, and I gave up on it multiple times. And then the editorial process was really intense.
And then the editorial process was really
So at that point,
intense.
I just wanted to finish the darn thing.
Yeah.
So I didn't really
point,
see any
I
future
just
for it
wanted to
beyond
finish the darn
I'm gonna
thing.
just
I
get this
didn't really
deadline.
see any future for it.
And now this future is here, and now there's this kind of public-facing component
so
of
now
it,
this
and
future
it
is
feels,
here, and now
yeah,
there's
like I
this
didn't
public-facing
envision it at all, which is
component
good. It's a
of
good
it, and
place
it
to,
feels,
yeah, like because when you have expectations when you
It's a good
publish, I
place
think that you're setting yourself up for
Because when you have expectations,
Disappointment.
disappointment,
It's one of my
right?
favorite words.
Yeah, yeah. So it's good to start at a place of no expectation, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Where were you when you heard
Good
her?
to
How'd
start
you
at a
find
place of
out?
no expectation.
I was
Where were you
house
when
sitting in
you heard her?
Montreal,
How'd you find
and There was some buzz around the book of prediction Instagram. Because on the internet there's whole communities around predicting book or stuff. And so there were predicting. My book came out on those, and I really tried to block it out. And but then my editor from the UK texted me saying, "Hey, we have some things." But the chat, they never texted me saying, "Hey, we have right." So that's chat. They never
You weren't sitting in front of your screen like refreshing the book.
No, I was really trying to stay out of it. Yeah.
That's good. That's healthy, right?
Stay out of it. Yeah, and it was a strange feeling because the book is so personal, and suddenly more and more people know about it.
Yeah.
And my grandfather, the main character by the end of the book, does not know about the main character by the end, actually.
Yeah.
And so it's like I feel like the book is slowly cornering him. And maybe one day it'll be translated into Ukrainian, and he'll find out. Maybe one day it'll be translated.
One of my favorite people in the book. So the fact that he doesn't know in real life. I feel like he loves seeing himself. The fact that he doesn't know himself represented. I feel like he loves seeing himself.
I have no idea really. It's
so why haven't you told him?
He decided to stay in his city. While it was, first it was occupied by the Russians, then it was liberated, and then first it was dams flooded, the dams exploded, so the region flooded, and now the city is basically like a human safari where the drones are targeting civilians, almost as training practice. And so throughout all of that, he has stayed, and so we tried to convince him to leave, and we couldn't. And part of this book is actually me trying to come to terms with that decision. And I mean, I just didn't understand it at the time. But I think it's that, if he's going to go, he's going to go on his own terms in his own way. I think it's that, he's going to go on his own terms in his own way. Yeah. Well, I think, and
What would you think?
he already knows we're worried about him. And to have a whole book about that worry being presented to him, and I don't think that would help. And when I myself was in Ukraine, I don't think that would help. Like after when I myself get text messages from them, like, "Are you okay?" And I had this feeling of text messages. Well, I know I'm okay right now. I had this feeling almost like you're worrying by choice. I'm not putting this worry on you. And I know that's not exactly a good thing to think, but I know that's not. I guess I didn't want to put my worry on him anymore. But he hasn't. I guess I didn't want to put my worry on him. And maybe I just chickened out.
Part of me just really wants him to know this, right? When you've been like someone who's taken a really good photograph,
know this, right?
You want like that person to see it.
Really good photograph.
And so there's something in that, like this is how
that
I
person to see
this
it.
is.
So there's something in the light,
and I hope how it gets to see it at some point.
And you look good in the light.
Have you had readers read themselves into your characters? Have you had readers, family members, or friends read into this character?
Probably, but I hope not, right? It's like where you want like huge letters, like size 40 font. This is a work of fiction, like there. There is a work of like a bit flattering if people think like this is about them, or
but it is like a bit flattering
or whatever. Because it means like your reality, the reality that you're building there is actually
because it means like your reality,
like
the reality that you're building there is actually.
And then to sort of say it's like I don't know. I think people maybe want to be
and then to sort of
stars to a degree, right? And to believe like this is the debut.
Stars to a degree.
I think maybe there are elements of myself that would sort of. I think maybe saying like elements of myself, Ian, your Beckett, Ian, your gluten, right?
Repeatedly saying
because I do give slivers of myself to each of these different characters. So when I read it,
because I do give slivers of myself.
There are things in each character that I can sort of identify with and recognize, right? That's how I get it.
There are things in each character that I can sort of identify with and recognize.
But I mean, my characters are so messed up that I really don't want, my dad or my brother to say like,
that I really don't want.
You really didn't,
my dad or my brother to say like,
no, it's not good. You
really didn't.
But you use that detail, the Toyota's in there. It's not your Toyota.
Your family doesn't read, right? Okay. That's lucky. I think that's good.
Yeah. No, that's lucky. You just write under a pen identity. What was that non-fiction writer? Totally. Oh, it was a scam. That was a fraud. What was that non-fiction? Totally. Oh, it was a scam. Yeah.
Some pointers to take from that person.
Right. But are you afraid that when you go forward writing now, after the successes of the last, are you afraid that when you go forward writing now, go back to the page, after the successes, like you'll be a different kind of writer, either A, feeling the pressure to write for success. Either A, B, feeling the right pressure to write like a timely book that sort of has its pulse on like global events. Do you feel yourself being molded or shaped into the future? Do you feel yourself being molded?
Well, I mean, good question. Yeah, I feel that with every new project I start, I game myself into it in some way. So after when I was writing my first book, I felt like I could do anything. So when I was writing my first book, I didn't think anybody would actually read it. I could just be in the sandbox by myself. And then once people did read it, and I couldn't delude myself anymore. So with my second book, I had to game myself into just calling it a So with my second book, in fact, I wrote a totally, when I gave up on this book, I wrote a totally different book that I didn't tell anybody about my publisher and my agent, nobody, and I don't tell anybody about strategy, but that way I could delude myself into thinking nobody I can do whatever. With my next book, I can do whatever. So my next delusion is going to be that because this book is so complex. There's a really big cast of characters, and it's doing all these things with form and multiple perspectives. My next file is just called a short and simple book. And that, so my laser focus is that and not the public, and that like whatever the public perception of it, because ultimately I have no control over like whatever the public perception of it.
Maybe similar kind of streams here. Write like a really tight 150-page book. Like maybe similar kind of streams here. Write like a really tight 150 single story. But my brain doesn't quite work that way. Right? It might start off that way.
You start off that way, right?
Yeah, you got like one plot line and then you're like, oh, but what about this person?
Right?
Yeah, you got like one plot line. The layers keep like accruing.
But that's an organic process.
Yeah, it starts one way.
But that's an organic
process. I just stop before all it starts one way, right? Like you just stop after year 3 and stuff here, right? Like you just stop.
Well, I'll return the question to you. I mean, you won the Giller, and right now you're on the list, and so you've had a very Giller, very public reception to your work. So how has that affected your process? Very public reception to your work. So how has that affected your
fiction? Everything still takes long, right? Like it takes a long time, but I do feel like really free, right? Like it takes a long time, but I started off writing poems and like low stakes, right? And I started off writing poems and like low stakes. But I do feel like I could pursue and tell a story in whatever way that I wanted to. But I do feel like I could pursue and tell a story in whatever way. Feel like subject to the market or to pressure or to whatever. That I can just actually follow my imagination, and that's a really that I can just actually. That's a great thing. I think that's good fortune to not have to worry. That's a great thing. I think that's good fortune. So prizes can go two ways, right? You can win a prize young or early, and it can really mess you up psychologically, right? Win a prize make you think early. That I must continue doing the same thing if I'm to continue being successful, right? I've seen writers fall into the same thing if I'm to continue being successful, right? And the other thing it can do is to say like, hey, and the other trusted your instincts for this thing that was prize winning. Hey, and you should continue to trust your instincts going forward. Without fear of public reception, like you've got goodwill on your side. Without fear, it's going to be okay if you're being authentic and true to the project, right? And I think that second feeling of like being authentic and true to the project, right? And I think that second feeling of like real freedom. And that's, I think, the advantage of being successful a little bit later in your career. Not in your 20s or something. The advantage of being successful a little bit later where you've got enough balance and enough disappointment to sort of balance. You've got enough balance and enough disappointment.
And I think ultimately it's about your relationship with your art, right? And that's, I think ultimately it's about your relationship. Validation, external validation is really wonderful, but it does fade,
Validation.
right? But what
External
doesn't fade
validation
is
wonderful, but it
your
doesn't fade.
the incredible
Right?
intimacy
But what
you
doesn't
achieve
fade
with your
is
characters
your
and this
incredible
long
intimacy
relationship you have, right, with your projects.
Right.
No one,
long
whatever the reviews are, or
Right.
awards or not awards,
Right.
no one
Yeah.
changes that.
Whatever
That's
the
the
reviews are,
thing.
So
or
true,
awards
right?
or
Do you
not
like building
awards, no one
sentences?
changes that.
I still will get up from my desk
So
sometimes,
true,
and
Right, do you like building
fist
sentences?
pump or like high
I
five
still
will get up
from
from my desk.
sometimes.
And
Fist
there's still
pump
this
or high five
exhilaration that
building
comes from
sentences.
doing something
And,
well, regardless of
There's
if
still this
anyone is seeing you do it or
exhilaration
not,
that comes from
right?
doing something well, regardless.
Yeah,
of
there's
if
something
anyone
like
sees you do it or not.
acrobatic or
Really, yeah, there's something.
it's like the mental equivalent of that gymnastics or something. Like I finally can do a
It's like the
backflip,
mental
right?
equivalent of
I
that
finally
gymnastics.
solved that thing.
I finally can do.
I got it, and there's
I finally
like
solved
nothing
that
like
thing.
it, right? I
Um,
don't mean to wax
and
all sort
there's
of
like nothing
cheesy
like
or
it,
anything like that,
right?
but there really is
Wax all
nothing
sort of, cheesy or anything like that.
like
but there
doing
really
something
is
impossible.
nothing.
And then there's all those days where you fail and you fail and you
Oh.
fail and you fail and you're like,
And
wow,
then
what am I
there's all those
doing?
days
Should
where
I
you
keep
fail.
writing? And
Yeah.
I should just give up now. Should I
Yeah.
keep writing? And I should just, what do I do with
Like,
that?
does it knock you down? Are you someone who stays low for a long time, or?
What do I do with that?
Like,
I
does it
really go
knock you
between
down?
the two states very often, but I had this wonderful professor,
I really go
Elizabeth
between the
McCracken,
two
during my
states
MFA, and she
very
said,
often. I had this
it's the
wonderful
kinetic
professor,
energy
Elizabeth
between the
McCracken,
failed
during
state,
my
and she
MFA.
said,
It's the
that
kinetic
drives
energy
your work.
between the
It's the
failed
movement
state
between the two.
Oh, wow.
Because you don't want to stay in either state very long, right? Both are
Yeah.
Because you don't want to
self-destructive
stay
action.
in either
We
state
talked about
very
this one
long,
time, right? Like
right?
the
Both are
amount of energy, even like
self-destructive
good news
actions.
takes from you,
Talked about this
right?
one
Like
time,
you
right?
get this great
Amount
news
of energy, even like good news takes.
but you
from
just
you.
can't operate at this frequency of happiness all the time, right? Like you just can't go through
operate at
breakfast,
this
lunch, dinner,
frequency of
food weeks,
happiness all the
super
time.
excited.
Breakfast,
At some
lunch,
point, you
dinner,
know,
weeks.
super excited, the recycling comes back. So like everyday feeling. Yeah, we have time.
I think we should open it up to questions.
Okay, let's.
Yeah, hurry for time, so.
I think we should open it up to
There's gonna be a
questions.
mic in the middle, right? You said, and then
Yeah.
So, Sarah, there's gonna be a mic in the middle, right? You
any
said, and then-
questions? The books about writing.
Any questions?
It's like you to be a political expert on Ukraine, Russia.
Sometimes yes. I feel like,
Ukraine, Russia.
yeah, sometimes.
sometimes, yes.
I always say that I am one
Yeah.
person and I cannot speak for
I
a
know
nation.
that,
I always say that I am
for
one
a nation, and that there are
Zelensky
so
cannot
many
speak
different
for a
lenses.
and that there are so many different lenses to the war.
And we're going to be
And we're
talking
still
about
talking about
the war in Ukraine for a very long
And
time,
we're
and
gonna be
it's
talking
the
about
kind of
the
layering
war
of
in
all these
Ukraine
different perspectives
for a very long
that
time.
give us an
And
understanding.
there's no layering of
one single perspective.
perspectives that
Yeah.
will give us an understanding. There's no
Any thoughts or questions?
Right.
Hey there. See folks
Any
coming.
thoughts or questions? Hey there, see folks coming.
Thank you very much, both of you. You both talk about, or you both write with very interesting structures and changes and switches, echoes from previous chapters and changes and switches and echoes from previous chapters. Doing that, are you thinking about, this is going to really challenge the reader? Are you actually thinking about this is going to engage with those interesting structures, or they're expecting this, so, and if I take them that way, structures, or they're expecting this, so, and if I take them that way, I can push them into a different place.
I can go for that. So, I, as someone who works in the opera field
So,
and who has an older sibling,
as someone who works in the opera
I've gone
field
to a
and
lot
was
of
an older
contemporary
sibling
music
composer,
concerts.
I've gone
And
to
some
a
of
lot
those pieces are so,
contemporary music concerts.
it's almost like the
And
composer
some of those
really doesn't care about the
pieces
listener
are
at all, and they're just
so,
kind of
it's
banging
almost
a
like the
metal
composer really
bucket
doesn't care about
with
the listener
a spatula and saying like what I can do. So,
bucket
and I really
spatula
don't want to
and
be
like
like
what
that.
I can do.
So
I
do think about the reader, and I want to engage with them.
I do think about
When I was
the reader,
writing
and I want
this,
to
I
engage with
watched
them.
Everything Everywhere All at Once.
When I was writing
and,
this, I watched
I imagine a lot of people
Everywhere
here have
All at
seen it,
Once.
and probably remember that there is a fake
imagine
ending
a lot of
in the
people
middle of
here
that
have seen
movie,
it,
right?
and
And the credits start
probably
to
remember
roll.
that there is a
And I
fake
saw that
ending
movie in the theater twice.
And I saw that movie
both
at
times,
the theater
nobody got up from their
twice.
seats.
Right?
And so we had this nobody got a like sense of narrative, right? So when an ending is not satisfying or it's too early narrative, right? So when an ending is no, I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna wait for the real thing, and everyone sat in their seats, and I'm gonna wait for the real thing. That's what and gave me the courage to do something like that in my book. Because there's also this, at the point of derailment, the book also ends, right? There's also acknowledgement section at the point of derailment on types, etc. Because at that point I did believe that there was on types, etc. Because at that point I did believe because they would know the reader is very smart. They know that that's not the real that there has to. They would know the reader is very smart. They know
you
that
say that thing about contemporary music.
has to be said.
It's about to hear you say that. How many times the violins are screeching and like this, you can't hum along to anything. How many times the violins are screeching and like this, you can't hum along to anything. Yeah, I feel similarly. And my thing is like rule number one. Yeah, I feel similarly. And my thing is like rule number one. Like my thing is I don't want to abuse trust, right? If a reader stays with you for a while. My thing is I don't want to abuse trust, right? If a reader stays with you for a while. And also, if things are about to get complicated, there should be some indication things are about to get complicated. Preparing the reader. Someone said like every book teaches you how to read. Preparing the reader. And so I would just drop something that teaches you how to read with no precondition. I would just drop something some blue. There are these cues that the sensitive reader will pick up on. When it's these cues that the sensitive reader will pick up on. That's weird. When it's something changes, they'll be like, yeah.
And sometimes you do lose readers. True. And you do, and you can't really control for that either. And you do lose readers. And you do, and you can't really control for that either. Of the reader that will understand.
Yeah, you kind of hope that those readers will pay for it again at some point. Yeah, you kind of hope that those readers will pay for it again at some point too.
I apologize for the sports analogy, which seems very popular these days. But you talked about that feeling of wow, I've got it right. You talked about that feeling of I've got it right, I got it wrong. Straight and so how do you know I got it wrong? How do you recognize? So how do you are you right all the time in those moments? How do you recognize?
That's such a good question.
It is a good one. Because it's more than just a feeling, right? Like you get that exhilaration, you get like these blasts. Because it's more than just a feeling, right? Like you get that exhilaration, you get like these blasts of dopamine. But for me, there's a kind of mental clicking where my questions about that issue. There's a kind of mental clicking where my questions about that left enough of an imprint in the book, whatever I'm doing. Like that I know, oh, there's future potential here, there's direction here. That I know, oh, there's just kind of potential here, there's direction here. It feels right, sure, kind of like, but it also satisfies a number of like pre-existing criteria. It feels right, sure, but it also satisfies a number of like pre-existing criteria, and all of those. That's a like anxieties. Just knowing I got it right, they go to quiet. But I feel disquieted if things are still said they're wrong. But I feel disquieted if things are still.
So if I'm bored by my own writing, that's how I know something's not. So if I'm bored by my own writing, that's how I know something's not writing into that right. But sometimes I have to just keep. So I'm constantly reading my own engagement, something with my work. So I'm constantly reading my own engagement. It's a really finicky thing because sometimes you think you've like it's a really finicky thing because sometimes you're like Heather O'Neill said this and she's and then you read it the next day like Heather O'Neill said this and and then you read it the next day and the totally other novel example when I gave up on this one. I was way too excited about it when I gave up on this one. I was way too excited about it. I was kind of in that upward trajectory of excitement. And it had gone through the wash. I was kind of in that upward trajectory. Dejection, and it had gone through the wash cycle, and it slightly better, and then more dejection, change, better. So you kind of go through that wash cycle more times, and it hadn't done that. So you and that was a wash cycle sometimes, and it has to have done that. And that was a good lesson for me that
time. There's no substitute for time.
Wait a moment.
To give you clarity on time, right? There's no substitute for time. To give you clarity on something.
I have to use audiobooks now. And one of the presenters this week says the audiobooks they would not read their own book. Of the presenters this week, I had an Anne Michaels book, and she read their own book, and it was wonderful.
Which one?
I had an Anne Michaels book. Yeah, she read. So I just want to encourage you to read your books on health.
I did it. So this book, because I come into it as a character. So there are chapters this book because I come into it as a character and there are chapters written myself. So the producers of the audiobook did ask me to read those chapters, and at first I said, no, audiobook did ask me to read those chapters. I didn't want to bring down the quality of the audiobook, but I sent them samples. They liked them. The audiobook, but I sent them samples. It was actually a really difficult process, to be honest, because those were the most. It was actually a really difficult process, to be honest, and because in the practicing for the audiobook that finally hit me what I wrote about the war, and finally hit me what I wrote about the war.
I think for like nonfiction, I feel okay like reading stuff. For fiction,
For like nonfiction, I feel okay like.
yeah, Rand has sent me like the audition tapes
Fiction,
of some actors.
Yeah, Rand has sent me like the audition tapes that I
heard,
heard,
like,
some
like
actors.
that's the guy, right? This
And,
guy.
you know, there were three of them.
Of course, he read it like better than I can.
That's the
God,
guy,
right?
right? This guy.
God, Princess,
Of
God.
course, he read it like better than I
It's
can.
just you're a trained professional, right? You're an actor. You know how to do this.
Beckett, he was
And I would
just
prefer to like
you're a
trust a
trained
professional,
professional,
you're an
design
actor, you know, trust the
people.
folks who know their
And I
jobs.
would prefer to like
Instead of
trust a
thinking that
professional,
because I
trust the design people,
story that I
folks who know
know
their jobs.
everything and can do
Instead of
everything
thinking
better.
that because I
than
wrote a
folks there.
story that I
So
know
maybe nonfiction, you
everything,
can hear my
writing better. Sort of folks there. So
personal
maybe
connection
nonfiction, you
with
can hear my,
but for fiction, I think.
sort of
Okay.
personal connection
Okay,
with
we'll have
others.
other folks
But
do
for
that.
fiction, I
Have
think.
you heard the audiobook?
Okay. Okay, but having other folks do that. Have you heard the audiobook?
I got one that felt like it was a machine reading it. So I got one that felt like it was a machine reading it already. So
But Ann Michael's reading anything.
You don't want the audiobook, but Ann Michael's reading anything, right? It's gonna be-
I was building on
Very
that
simple,
audiobook
yeah.
comment because I also, because of time and everything else, have started using audio. I also, because of time and everything else, have started using audio. You've talked a lot about form and container, but I find whether something makes a good audio container is very dependent on whether something makes a good audio. Is very and more and more people are using the form or the structure. So I wondered whether more and more people are personally ever thought how is this going to sound? You personally ever thought how is this going to sound? Are starting to be effective at writing, or whether you think by the different ways people are reading that.
Yeah.
By the different ways people are reading
So
that.
voice is never too far from me,
Yeah.
and voice is a literal thing, right? Not just like
So,
a voice of
voice is never too far from me, and voice is
and
a
I do
literal
sort of
thing,
take
right? Not just
particular
voice.
delight in like conversational parts of
And I do sort
books,
of take
and so I'm always thinking
particular
about like
delight
this is
in like
going to translate
conversational
well.
parts of books. And
Reproduction,
so I'm
there's
always
this
thinking
whole
about like,
section
this is
that's
gonna
just
translate
dialogue,
well.
right? Like
In reproduction, there are those whole
narrative
sections
at all.
are just
So
dialogue.
yeah, I
right?
like.
But you do talk about
no
using different
narrative at
fonts
all. And so, yeah,
which is something that's physical, that's visual.
Right.
They both seem like you're quite visual, which is something that's physical, that's visual.
Right.
They both seem like you're quite visual things.
But there's an apt translation from like the visual into
But
the
there's an
auditory.
apt
So
translation
for like those
from like the
we talked with
visual
the producer about
to the
this.
auditory.
For
And so
those
for like
faded out
those,
texts,
we
there's
talked
this
with the
kind
producer about
of almost
this.
like mosquito-like
For those
thing
faded
that
out
you hear, right?
texts,
Something
there's this kind of almost like
that is
mosquito-like
not in
thing
the
that you
real
hear, right?
of the
Something
story. There's a
this-
little bit of like
that is not in the
echo
real
mutedness
of the
there.
story. There's a
Words that
little
are
bit
blacked
of
out,
like
you'll hear like a tape sort of
echo
across
muteness
it.
there. The words that are blacked out,
So
you
there
hear like a
are
tape
these,
sort of
it's
cross
pretty much an
it,
issue of
like,
coding, right? The
code.
book is coded
So there
both to be like
are
read
these,
aloud
it's
and also to
pretty
be
much an
read
issue of coding.
privately
Like, the book is
internally.
coded both to be like read
And
aloud
good
and also to
producers
be
able to
read
find those
privately and
moments
internally and all that.
And those metaphors that
And
kind of
a good
translate.
producer is able to find those moments and those metaphors that
Uh,
can translate into
Maybe not so specifically about the audiobook, but like
Uh,
the first part of the book, there's no first line.
Maybe not so
It
specifically
fades
about
in
the
from
audiobook,
white
but
page.
like the first part of the book, there's no first line.
becoming
It fades
less
in from a
grand
white
when it becomes
page.
black.
Just the-
And so
it
this is just like a, it was
less
a musical
gray
analogy, it
until
was like this
black.
volume being
And so
turned up.
this is just like a,
You're like
it was a
Beck
musical
Bumbling
analogy. It's
getting
like
the
this
book, and
volume
eventually
turned
you hear
up.
it at full
So
volume.
you hear like
So
Beck
that's a
Bumbling
pretty
getting
easy
kind
kind
of
of
like
like
eventually you hear it. So
yeah, I do
so
think
that's
about
a
it.
pretty easy kind of like translation.
For me, I
So-
didn't think
Yeah, I
of
do
the
think about
audiobook
it.
so much. I did think about
I
the
didn't
opera
think
stage
of
when I was writing
so much.
this.
I did
because
think
that's just
about,
the image I have of it. and in my head when I'm working on something, but that's just kind of, the beginning chapters are almost my head like aria on something, but character kind of, the beginning chapters are almost like arias, long characters, and then once the characters start to interact and their worlds are intersecting, it's like, and then once the characters start to interact and their worlds, and then in the great climactic scene is where everyone's on, and then in the great time, there's smoke machines, everyone's trying to sing over each other. So I thought about it in that way. So when the audiobooks, I thought about it in that way. There were conversations with the director about how to adapt it. The director about because as I mentioned, there's a fake how to adapt book when I felt so done with it. I just wanted to wrap it up. Fake ending and credits. I felt so done, and we worried that okay, someone's listening to this in their car and they hear the and we worried that okay, if someone's listening to this in their car and they hear that credits going, and maybe hopefully like with everything everywhere all at once, and maybe hopefully like with some people won't. So we issued this disclaimer at the very beginning of the audiobook saying, so when you think the book is done, disclaimer, it's not done, just keep listening. Yeah, and we shortened the acknowledgement section as well, because and when you look at it on the page, like you can kind of skip the acknowledgements, when you look at it on the page, like you left, you're kind of skip the acknowledgements, and you don't know there's still a half a book left. And to expand on your question, even when I'm reading chapters out loud from my book, I can adapt. Even when I'm reading chapters out loud, the chapter I read, like there's tons of crossed-out text. The chapter I read, I write tons of crossed-out audio text.
Yeah.
And things
It's the same, right? So I've got things like marked up and say like, we're not going to read that paragraph. It's the same, right? So I've got things like
I think we're constantly like adapting. This is very fixed, right? Like this book is fixed.
Yeah, I think we're constantly like adapting. This is very fixed.
But it also like it shifts over the years too. The things you choose to read, things
But it also like
are really important in the book, but they just don't work well for an audience who can't track.
are really important in the book, but they just don't work well for an audience who
Do we
can't
have time
track.
for one more? Or?
Yeah. Yeah. Do we have time for one more? Or?
I'll go for a two-part question. Keep you guys speaking as long as possible. Firstly, keep you guys speaking as long as possible. Big broad question. And what are your big broad major influences? What are your cultural major influences? Cultural. Sorry.
Why do you
I guess I can start with that one.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm still answering that question for myself, I would say. When I began writing, my answer to that was, well, I have a bad memory, which is why I always have this compulsion to write everything down. And then I realized that's not quite why I write, and now my answer is more like, it's very hyperbolic. It's like I would suffer a psychological death if I didn't. Because I think writing for me is a way to make meaning out of life, and if something bad is happening to me, it's almost like I split into two different people. There's the person who's in the room with the bad thing, but then there's also another person who's maybe a little bit dissociated, who's recording everything and being a wallflower and saying, well, this is bad, yes, but we can make something out of this. This must be happening for a reason. And there's actually a chapter in this book where I write about, like, in the grieving process of the war, trying to understand it and what was happening to my relatives. There is that kind of bargaining phase in grief, right? And for me, that was kind of fantasy building. And I almost had this feeling of, oh, this war must be happening so that it could be written about, right? That has to be why, right? Because there's no other sense, right? So, yeah, that's kind of my answer right now, but it might shift in the years.
Yeah, I think to sort of do like historically, when I started writing, as a kid, it was just like I kept a bunch of diaries and kept a bunch of journals. And that was because I couldn't speak, right? I couldn't talk, say, within my family about what was going on there. And so the best I could do, if this had to be understood and expressed, and you're a 9-year-old boy, like you just write it down, right? And I got a notebook, went to the dollar store, and like we just had
these notebooks. And so there was a kind of necessity, right? There, like one part of it's here closed, and I needed to sort of express in a different way. And so if you grow up alongside that kind of like habit or function or outlet, then I feel like my brain sort of got, like this was how I learned how to process things, right? Like by writing it. And so through university and beyond that. And so even when there was nothing painful or difficult to work through, I still wrote as a method of like understanding. And the second part, I think, is I also like to make things, right? So I was a very crafty kind of kid, like folding paper and like doing these kinds of things. Not like that, please don't read into it. But would like to sort of make God satisfaction from like bringing something to completion. And I think all that happened somewhere late high school or early university was like material just moved from something to words, right? Yeah, so that's the why. I really do like to make something and to have it exist in the world, yeah.
And in terms of influences, so part two of the question, there have been many, many influences. Margaret Lawrence, her book Bird in the House was the first linked story collection I read. I didn't know that could even exist. And my first book is a linked story collection, so it was a direct influence there. Right now, specifically, I'm thinking of Edward Carey, who is living in the UK now. But he taught me to look at every human flaw with love. And whether it's a physical flaw or a character flaw or whatnot, to not look at it from judgment, but from tenderness. Yeah, so I think even the most flawed characters in my work, I do have a tenderness for them. And the reader can judge them all they want, but I try to be open.
Yeah, I mean, they're like literary influences, people who are like your family. And I think everybody knows like how much I owe and love Margaret Atwood. And then there are these other kinds of arts, right? So I'm sure like opera, you could probably point to a bunch of things that have had a big influence. And I mean, there are these kinds of developmental things that happen. So I can listen to, I don't know, like a prelude or something like that and be able to sort of translate that into something that would work in a poem, right? So I get my inspiration from a different form altogether and then able to do it. And yeah, there's, yeah, okay. That's good.
That's really asked for you. Okay.
That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think we have answered all the questions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
That was such a fantastic conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you to everybody in the audience who came out to this event. We do want to know about your experience here, so if you could log on to the kingstonwritersfest.ca, please let us know in our online survey. Now what you need to do is make sure that you have multiple copies of each of these books because Christmas is coming. It's like around the corner. So you want to get those books signed. So buy them in the festival bookstore and then you can meet our authors outside. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the festival.